Good afternoon, all of you. I am here to introduce Professor K. Pushpanadham. He will be speaking about a topic on changing landscape of learning in a school education, digital learning movement in India. Professor Pushpanadham is a friend of mine. We met each other when we were students in RIE-NCERT. He is currently a professor of education administration at MS University of Baroda in the Department of Educational Administration. I normally consider him as a professor of Europe. I hardly find him in India because he has got very many responsibilities, specifically in Sweden, in various capacities. And he is one of the unique personality when it comes to education administration. And he has various varieties of skills. He started as a mathematics person, went on to complete his sociology from Indore, did his master's in RIE, did his MPhil and PhD from Center for Advanced Studies in Education, Case Baroda, and he joined there as a faculty and currently also occupied various positions as a Senate member, as a dean, various positions he had taken up in MS University itself. And internationally, he was actually the Swedish Institute Guest Scholar Fellowship at the Institute of International Education, Stockholm University. Then visiting scholar fellowship at the School of Education in University of Sweden. Erasmus Mundus visiting professor fellowship at the Department of Education at Aarhus University in Denmark. Advanced International Training Program of Education for Sustainable Development in School Education, Swedish International Development Agency. So there are very many positions that he has occupied at national and international level. He was also the dean and the chairman for e-learning at Assumption University in Thailand. And he has innumerable publications to his credit. It's a long list of books as well as articles and publications, and he is also a member of many of those international associations and editors for many of the international publications, and a really very well experienced personality and a good speaker. Thank you for accepting our invitation to be with us, Professor Pushpanadham, and I invite you to deliver this session and enlighten us on this very important issue. You're welcome, please.
Very good morning to all of you. My friend, the chairman of the session, Dr. Paili, and his very inspiring words, they really challenge me to I qualify to be a presenter in this prestigious conference on ICT in school education. I have been listening for last 2 days. Various speakers highlighted about the technology, the technological advancements, their potentials, and then how this technology can be interfaced in an effective manner. Therefore, our objectives, our goals, our intentions can be achieved, accomplished effectively. I was seriously listening to the speakers and I was thinking about what has gone into education system, especially in the last maybe 17 years. That's what you call it as a millennium development. I consider this millennium age is the age of lot of commitments, goals, targets. We began with the Millennium Development Goals, MDGs. Then we talked about education for sustainable development goals. We began education for all goals. And we are talking about the digital learning commitments in the school education. And now we are talking about 21st century skills. So then I thought, if I need to make a presentation to an audience of this kind, I thought I must begin with the end. And the end is the school education. So I am trying to think whether there is any change in the process or the performance or the purpose of secondary education over the last 2 decades or 3 decades, which we need to really understand. Let us see to what extent this secondary education has undergone over a period of time in its purpose, first P, and the processes, the second P, and the third P is the performance. For me, the purpose of secondary education, whether you see across the the commissions, committees, and policy reports, the purpose of secondary education has not changed to that much. We need to really prepare our children to higher education, developing that vocationalizing secondary education. Therefore, you need to incorporate various things which are essential for him to become an effective individual in the society. And then what happened? Whether the process has changed? Yes, certainly, because there are so many disruptive technologies entered into the other sectors of economy. You talk about industry, you talk about the social sectors. They have been using these technologies and they are proving themselves to be more effective. Then they look at the secondary education system and say, the products that you are actually sending out are not really meeting the needs of the industrial setup. I know you all agree with me. This is the comment that we listen all the time from all sectors, saying that the students coming out of the system are not really having the adequate relevant skills and competencies. Therefore, they can be inducted into the world of work. And we also saw several studies which talked about whether the students of secondary education really possess the kind of competencies they require. Therefore, they can perform much better in their further learning and the work. I think that is the concern point to us. The concern point is the delivery of this purpose with which we began the journey is not really going out to be a magnificent, effective, and worth product in the system. Therefore, the performance, the third one, is always a question mark, and sometimes we feel guilty that we put a lot of efforts into the system, but the kind of appreciation that we get, the kind of feedback that we get from the system is not really encouraging. Friends, in this context, I would like to present certain observations about how this technology is really influencing, whether really influencing the purpose of secondary education, the process of secondary education, and then the performance of it in the larger system of education today. We have been worrying about teaching in a digital age, which means we have realized that we are in an age where everything is digitized. Imagine if there is no network in your mobile, or there is no network in this room, probably you start feeling some kind of discomfort. What I mean to say, we have gone to such an extent that we attached ourselves to these technological devices. Therefore, we are living in a digital age. Therefore, we need to incorporate certain things into our processes. So what is it happening around us? is the question. If we want to make teaching, learning in a more effective way in the digital age, we must make use of them in an appropriate way. We have no time to accuse the digital resources. You need to use it. There is no accusing. So for making use of digital sources, what is required? You need to really competent enough to understand what it is and what potentials it has and how effectively we can integrate it. I will talk a little about it in the later part of my presentation. Whether you agree or disagree, teaching and learning process has a paradigm shift in the digital era. There is certainly a paradigm shift. Yesterday, we were listening to the presentation, The Hole in the Wall. He says, we must make the process reverse. And the reverse process is, the teacher has to learn in the context. And the context is empowered with the technology. So the question is, to what extent that learning contexts, learning environments can be created in the classroom situations? And for that, what are the necessary conditions? The second important thing that we must observe, that learners have become more independent and the teachers are still insisting on conventional methods of teaching, which is a very common observation cutting across the researchers. Learners are more vibrant. Learners are more explorative. But when it comes to teaching, teachers are more or less conventional because they are working in a context and the context demands certain outcomes from the teacher. The another significant thing is, the learners today in the digital age are the digital natives. Perhaps you and me are the digital migrants. So we are trying to understand the technological evolution and try to adapt to it and then try to apply to our professional context. But the learner, a small child, can comfortably operate a smartphone and probably he will say what is there in it and how you can use it. So the learners are basically becoming independent. Therefore, the kind of support is required through conventional methods are no longer required. Therefore, the teacher's role is redefined in the digital age. That's one of the very important things that we need to understand and accept. And the third one is, the world is moving fast. The knowledge explosion is happening. And if you really don't orient our children into this fast phase of life, probably they become misfits in the global world, and therefore you really need to think about how to make use of the kind of technologies we have. Therefore, the system can be empowered. So these are certain things that we are witnessing in the system. People have discussed about the artificial intelligence. And today, a machine can do much more than efficiently than a man or a person. And we need to understand the kind of jobs which were there maybe 3 decades ago have absolutely disappeared today in the industrial sector, because they found these artificial intelligence can help them to do certain works with a lot of efficiency and zero defect. And that's happening in a big way, and education is not exception. The second important thing is automation. You don't require a person to be there to monitor the things, but everything can be done within the context with the help of technology. Digitization, globalization, augmented realities, networking. So all these things are actually happening in the system. And then we as educators, from the point of education that we talk, we always talk about dehumanizing education. Are we really going towards dehumanizing? In a sense, our purpose is not in terms of knowledge and skill development, but we also want in our children the attitude and the values and the habits. Therefore, we always take this point and say, if we walk towards the developments happening in industrial sector, probably we are forgetting one important thing, that is, are we really dehumanizing education in the process of automation, in the process of digitization, in the process of using artificial intelligence, etc. I think this is one challenge which all educators need to think. Friends, when we talk about the school education, there are three important players. The first player is the curriculum. The curriculum is, this is what we need to transact in the institutions. The curriculum is the kind of learning experiences that we design so that we make learning more meaningful and more effective. So the curriculum has objectives, the curriculum has goals, the curriculum has a content, and the curriculum has a domain of knowledge. Now, this curriculum has to be transacted in its real spirit and meaning, and that has to be done through teachers and their classroom delivery. So friends, if the teachers understand curriculum from its core and the core point of view, probably there is a scope for him to adopt appropriate learning experiences to transact. For example, if you are teaching mathematics, try to reflect what is happening in classrooms with respect to teaching of mathematics. Teaching of mathematics is essentially happening in schools with respect to what is given in a text we consider as a knowledge domain, and then try to finish it over a period of time, because it is a distributive learning. You need to finish in certain semesters, then you conduct examinations, then you say this is the number and therefore the learning is out. Friends, if you really understand the core of teaching a subject in the broader spectrum of education, you are basically referring to development of certain core competencies. Imagine if the child is not able to solve any problem that he faces in the society, a mathematical problem, a logic, reasoning, but he scores excellent marks in the examination that we conduct. To what extent we really qualify that we taught mathematics to our children? So we have specific purpose to each and every subject that we deal, and the textbooks are the means. Textbooks are the tools in the hands of a teacher, like the computers or internet or anything that we talk about. So the core competency of teaching English is to develop language ability. The core competency of teaching mathematics is to develop problem solving. The core competency of teaching the science is development of scientific attitude and temper. And the core competency of teaching social studies is to develop social sensitivity. The friends, whether you use technology, you don't use technology, the objectives and the purpose and the goals of education at this particular level is to develop these core competencies, thereby they can face anything that they do in the future. Therefore, the teachers need to understand what is very important in the context and how this context can be activated, can be accelerated with the help of all possible tools that he has in his hand. Therefore, I always say, when you talk about teaching and learning process, is not a technology and learning process. The teacher is not replaced, or teachers can never be replaced. But what is required is, you need to have another T somewhere in between the T and P. The technology and the teacher learning process. So how to tame technology into the classroom process to enable our learners to acquire the essential knowledge, the skills and competencies. So the first thing that we need to understand is what for we are actually talking all these actors in the pedagogical process. Our basic purpose is to enhance learning. Whether we use technology or use conventional method, the learning is our purpose, and therefore we need to understand what actually we mean by learning. Several research findings, definitions, they all talk about learning is a permanent change in behavior, the behavior of a learner, and that behavior is a desirable behavior, and that behavioral change is due to his learning, knowledge, skills, attitudes and habits. The friends, this behavior is the outcome of the belief systems. So the question that comes to me always is, to what extent our curricular processes, the contents that we talk about, are really generating certain belief systems in the minds of our learners about themselves, about learning process, and about the institution where he or she is learning. I think this is one question which all educators need to address. If we develop a kind of a belief system that this is the institution which is having lot of opportunities to learn, giving ample freedom to learn, therefore the learner is independent in thinking, in feeling and doing, therefore he acquires lot of resources that are available the outside the sphere of classroom. So the question is, when you talk about learners, to what extent we enhance their learning is the question. What are the conditions for learning is another question, and then we try to relate whether the technology can really fulfill those conditions. So the first condition for learning of any learner is the readiness. Several theories talks about it in psychology, says the learner has to be ready. The learner should have the willingness to learn. You can take the horse to the pond, but you cannot make it drink. Therefore, the question is, to what extent the technologies that we have really make learner ready to learn? Whether the institutional setup, whether the organizational environment, whether the learning resources or the technology, to what extent you really pull the learner into the learning process, therefore he becomes more active learner. It's not that lot is taught and nothing is understood. If you remember the learning without burden, the beautiful statement that you find, lot is taught in the schools, but very little is understood and learned. And this happens only because the learner is not ready to learn and is not having that predisposition to the entire pedagogical process. So the friends, the first condition for learning is to create an environment, an enabling environment, where the learner actively engage into the learning process. So the counter argument is, to what extent technology can really make learner engaging into the learning process. The second important condition for learning is there should be a free and fair environment in which learner can engage in thinking, in exploring, in interacting, in conceptualizing. Friends, we need to ask this question to us. To what extent the kind of environment that you are creating within the institutions are free and fair? So when the environment is not free, probably the learner detach himself to the system and he will never go ahead into the educational ladder. And the third important condition for learning is freedom from fear, which is a very important thing. It applies to teachers as well. So we studied a lot of researchers across the world, and then we really want to look what are those learning spaces which really contribute and create conditions for learning for children. So one thing prominently came out was, it is an environment which is freedom from fear. This is a question which we need to ask, whether the technology is really giving an opportunity for a learner to be free and the freedom from fear. So a fearful mind cannot think, cannot create, cannot innovate. But the condition in which we actually process learning is predominantly the fear on the part of a teacher and also on the part of the learner. So first we need to understand to what extent this curriculum, teacher and learner need to be redefined in the system of digital age. Therefore, you probably incorporate the conditions for learning into the system. When I say that there is a change in the knowledge, initially the sources of knowledge was only an institution. Now everywhere. You don't need to really go to school, really go to a place, really talk to teacher. So now what happened? It is a connected classrooms. We did a project with the Asia Euro Foundation about 25 countries in Asia and Europe, and we connected the classrooms with the digital medium. And imagine the kind of knowledge they generated through exploring on the World Wide Web and then discussing about the validity of the content by Skype or social networking, and they have come out with a wonderful projects, and that learning was a very fulfilling, satisfying learning for the child because he's actively participated in it. So the sources of learning have become multiplied, and now it is everywhere. The child can learn from everywhere, anywhere, at any point of time, which is a challenge for institutions. So friends, if we want our children to come to our schools, we really need to address it, what extra that really school can provide. Otherwise, it's difficult for him to explore in the World Wide Web. I think that's one of the challenge that we have in the digital age of learning. The second important aspect is understanding the knowledge, which is a static and now it is dynamic. We are comparing, we are contrasting, we are debating, we are discoursing. So the knowledge domain has also become more dynamic. It's not static. The explosion of knowledge, the explosion of knowledge is multiplied. It's happening in a drastic way because the boundaries are broken. Now the world knowledge is coming from all corners. Therefore, how to address that? And can we really address in the classroom, this particular thing is happening outside the classroom situations? And the nature of knowledge is also changed. So it used to be an authority, the teacher, or maybe the elderly person, or maybe a sage, who were considered as the authority of the knowledge, and today a personal, contextual, experiential. It's me who experience what it is. This is what I found. Therefore, I want to cross-check with my colleagues in different contexts. So the experiential learning is coming up in a big way, in which the child is engaged, in which child has the scope. Therefore, he actually constructs the knowledge within himself. So the knowledge is seen not as compartmental, but it is a holistic knowledge. So when these changes are happening in knowledge, don't you think that we also need to change in the process of delivering that knowledge to the children. Today, the whole world is focusing about certain core 21st century skills, not the subject scholastic attainments. Somebody said, in a very sarcastic way, that schools have killed the creativity in our children. Schools have killed the creativity of children. Why? Because they are pushed with the time, the space, the width of the learning context in which they are engaged in. What does it mean? It means we want our children to be communicative. We want our children to be collaborative. We want our children to be critical thinkers. We want our children to be creative. Therefore, there is no scope for rote learning. It has to be replaced with a deep learning. The question is whether the technology that we have, internet or any other disruptive technology, whether it really helps us to promote this deep learning in our children is the question that we talk about. Therefore, the paradigm shift that you see in school education is our belief of learning is not the spoon feeding. We want our children to be self-learners. Therefore, the whole shift is from self-learning, not the spoon feeding. Therefore, how you make your learner more free from fear and free in the context that he can learn is one of the important things. When you want to make this happen in the institutions with the help of the technologies, what is most required is a concerted effort of all the stakeholders. And who are those concerted important stakeholders in the system? There are 3 C's that every institution need to consider if you really want to make ICT-enabled teaching and learning in our institutions. The first C is the competency, capacity or competency of the institution. So when I talk about the capacity, competency of the institution, I am referring to the capacity of the teachers and also the capacity of the institution in terms of the equipments, materials, and the competence in terms of how the human resources can make use of this. Friends, somewhere we need to check this. If we want to improve the standards of ICT, the capacity of the institution is very important and the capacity of the teachers. And the second C is the culture. To what extent we really use the culture, the learning culture that we instill in our institutions. So during the tea, I was talking to one of the gentlemen, Sudhir from Punjab. I was very much impressed with his success story. He said, a couple of years back, in a remote village, there were no communicative technologies available. But I wanted to make use of certain things which are so popular, therefore, the radio recordings to develop such interest in children. Therefore, you can bring them into the classroom, then you can begin with it. So what is important is, do we have that culture of learning in our institutions? Is it a lifelong learning perspective? Every teacher is given opportunity to learn beyond the textbook, learn beyond the curriculum. Therefore, the whole world knowledge can be brought into the classroom and make it a very interactive and a free kind of an environment where the learner is engaged. And the third important thing is the consequence of it. It's not that we are using technology, to what extent we are getting affected with it is also important. Are we really getting habituated to what extent our teaching methodologies have improved, to what extent the learning scores are increased. I think this kind of perspective is also important. So when technology has a potential to do it, technology is a medium, is a tool in the hands of an artist. And unless and until you train the artist to enact in an environment, technology will never happen, and technology cannot make any kind of change, and technology never promises. It is we who need to create that kind of environment in the institutions and prepare our institutional policies to great extent. So what is required today in terms of technology-enabled learning? The approach that is we are talking about multimedia. It's not one media, it's not the teacher. It's all kind of mediums, audio, video, interactive. Therefore, all senses of an individual are activated and directed towards learning. So institutions need to understand the importance of this and try to incorporate the way that can, looking into the need and the context of the organization. So what is required in 21st century is our classrooms need to be multimedia classrooms. It's not one media, multimedia, various mediums. So why multimedia? Because every media has its own potential, like every individual has its own needs. Therefore, you have a hope that you get connected to the hopes of the learners and the potential of the technology. And the second is multidisciplinary, which is also very important, and we can do a lot with technology. I'm not teaching only economics, but I'm teaching about the country as a whole, social development. I'm talking in terms of the history. I'm talking about the language. So how you integrate the subject that you teach with the life processes is the need of this hour. Technology can certainly do something to contribute to us to make our teaching learning process effective in this regard. Multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary approaches where the knowledge are actually interfaced. Therefore, the meaning is coming out with a broader vision, and that's required in the 21st century. And the multicultural is also important. And technology has a lot to contribute. Multicultural in the sense, you talk about today the global citizenship, which is a very important thing for children to learn in schools today. The global citizenship is to understand the cultural differences and celebrate the diversity. And this is only possible when you expose them to different cultural contexts. So the physical mobility is not necessary today, but the digital networking can create that kind of environment where children can interact, understand, and learn. And the multiple intelligence is another one. We really need to develop a perspective of developing all kinds of intelligences that we have, social, linguistic, mathematical. So where the technology can really help us to focus about the multi-intelligences, where the technology can really help us to focus on multicultural perspectives in education, where the technology can really help us to develop multidisciplinary approach, where the technology can really help us to have multimedia approach. Friends, I have decided to ask more number of questions because we have been listening to technology, what it is, how it can contribute, etc. Therefore, from the questions, if I am successful in generating some heat, let us collectively, we come out with some light, and that light will lead us to integrate this technology into education program and make a learning environment more productive, interesting, and meaningful. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor
Mr. Pushpanadham, for the wonderful presentation that you made regarding technology innovations. It is open for discussions. I would expect a few questions to the audience. Any issues, any suggestions, any observations, any questions? Sir, please. Yeah, I think you are welcome.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank Sir, Professor Pushpanadham, for his valuable speech, and really we come to learn a lot from this topic. But my only one thing that I want to know, this is a question you may say. You said using ICT or information communicative technology or whatever the technologies in the classroom situation, we are actually dehumanizing. So this is out and out. So my question is that how can we come out of this? Because when we just show a class, interactive class before the students, it is sure that they will get to know the competence of the concerned lesson. But how can we grow up values among them using the technology, sympathy, love and other things which a manual teacher usually does? So how can we come out of this dehumanizing of technology? This is my question.
Thank you. Any more questions? Yeah, please.
What context you are talking about, I think there is an existing crisis because as per the profile of the teacher at the national level, I think more than 60% teacher are digital illiterate. On the contrary, digital immigrants like us who have gone before 90s, and they have a kind of mindset and the habit of teaching. They have a kind of experience. On the contrary, the classroom is a digital native. Now, whatever strategy, whatever planning, whatever policy you may adopt, the main issue is that you have to give a boost to the teaching community to psychologically adapt this change. And that's a very tricky and very easy. What kind of intervention in kind of planning and training, in the curricular design of the teacher education, or even in the in-service program of teacher education, what kind of components need to be embedded so that this psychological barrier, that is, you are trying to fit this digital immigrant in the digital age, how this gap can be bridged. That is my interest of it. If you can enlighten.
Yeah, please.
My question is like, are we heading towards a dilemma in ICT and teachers' role? Because same thing what will happen, still we are confused about ethics, do's and don'ts, because it differs from place to place, person to person. So can we say that to whom we should give more importance, either ICT or teachers, or whether we will be on the verge of merging them, they have to come together. So I am a little confused. What is more important? Teacher will be more important example of this, or ICT will dominate the education system?
Any more? Okay, I think we will take up those three questions. After that, we'll come back to you again for other. So the three questions which are generated in this, one is the dehumanizing part of technology, the other one is the ethical dimension, whether technology or the teacher, and the last one is the middle one is the digital immigrant teachers, how do we transform them? Thank you, wonderful questions.
See, let me address the last one. Actually, there is no confusion. The confusion is only in our understanding. When we focus about ICT in school education, what is our basic focus is? Our objectives, as I said, the purpose of secondary education is already fixed. We are aiming to. Therefore, we are searching the routes to reach our goal more effectively and efficiently. Then one of the hopes with a lot of potential that you discovered, we found, is the ICT as a tool. Therefore, how ICT, the potentials can be better used to realize our goals of secondary education is our concern. There is no this or that, but our goal is fixed to reach the goal, how effectively we can reach, how the learning can be made prominent, vibrant, meaningful, independent. So the question is, can we use, or in which way we can use ICT, therefore we reach our goals? That's the confusion is, the goals of secondary education is there, that is our main purpose. Therefore, how we reach the goal is our concern, and we are trying to explore the alternatives, and technology is the alternative of the time. And there could be n number of alternatives that come in future as well, because the knowledge pursuit is happening in a drastic way. The second thing is, yeah, please.
I add something in this also.
Please. Yeah, please.
Actually, right now we are dealing with 21st century students, and they are very much tax savvy. And if we are not tax savvy, we are out of sea. So this is for survival.
The second important question which is there in the mind of educators is, are we really dehumanizing by overemphasizing on technology? It's a question. It's a question which we all need to reflect. Why? Because the kind of attachment that people have today in terms of the smartphones, in terms of the information, is much more than the interaction with the human beings. I read somewhere, they said, the most expensive thing in future, can you guess? They say it is the human being who has that love, time, care and concern, who can sit with you, talk to you, listen to what you say. Probably this is going to be the most expensive in future to come. Why? Because we are so much conditioned to technology, and we live together, but we live in isolation, and technology is there. So my concern here, the moment I mentioned about dehumanizing, it is you and me, educators, need to think about this aspect. Our concern is not only the development of cognitive domain, but the affective domain is also important. Therefore, to think about alternatives, to what extent we can use it. Whether technology really contribute it, or can we really interface this with something else? Therefore, this aspect, which is very important, cannot be neglected. And we could see the trend that's happening in the younger generation today in terms of technology. Therefore, it's a challenge for us to focus about that aspect rather than talk about conceptual understanding of a knowledge. Therefore, I said, education is not something that you rate in terms of scholastic attainments. The purpose of education right from the beginning is to develop the innate potentials of human beings, a behavioral change which is socially desirable. And for a behavioral change, you need to have certain strong beliefs, and the belief is important that need to be integrated, the teaching learning. So how teachers who are really digital immigrants, and how they can be made digital natives, therefore they feel comfortable in using it. I think the first thing that begins with sensitization. Unless and until teachers are sensitized, the importance of digital resources, they will never use it. So the sensitization has to come from within. And that needs a lot of exercise on the part of the policies, on part of the leadership, on part of various other stakeholders. Therefore, I said, there is always a kind of a contradiction that you find between imposing and initiated. And you know the result of it. If you impose certain things, then what happened? People work and, hide hands or nothing. They basically work not by the choice, but by force. But the moment you sensitize them, give them a little spark to think, to understand, to realize, probably your work is over. And they try to find out the alternatives because everything is open now, open educational resources, OER. but that spark has to be created, and the spark is created with the help of the environment that you design in the institutions. The environment is a continuous professional learning. You are developing a community of learners in the institutions. I think unless and until we focus on this aspect, only imposing will not happen and will not make any transformation in the systems. Therefore, the teacher as a component need to be exposed, and the self-realization has to be there, and for that the systems need to be created, not the policies alone. The systems have to be created. Hope I
think, yeah, the last question. After that, we will continue. Yeah.
Another question, sir. I just add to what sir said. I was having a workshop last year on ICT for school teachers, and sometimes there's a fantasy that you have, the teachers are almost going to pass out or move out also, families who also like 10 workshops. And there were these 3 gentlemen who were there for my workshop. And believe me, it was a 3-day workshop. On the second day of my workshop, they went and bought laptops. I was surprised. So I asked them, I said, why did you buy laptops here? What was superannuate next year? And he said, sir, what you did with us, we did not know that we could do such things. So I think this is a good way. And initiating is more important than imposing. When you impose, you want them to do it. When you initiate, you give them a spark something. And that is more important. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
So, yeah, I would like to again remember Thorndike, E.L. Thorndike, Edward Lee Thorndike. He says when a conduction unit is in readiness to conduct, for it to do so is satisfying. When a conduction unit is not in readiness to conduct, for it to do so is annoying. And when a conduction unit is in readiness to conduct, for it not to do so is also annoying. Yeah. So Professor Pushpanadham said about the motivation. The motivation is not only for the student, the motivation has to be for teachers also. If the teacher is ready to learn, for him or her to learn will be a satisfying thing. That creating that readiness, creating that motivation, coming up that, converting myself from a digital immigrant to a digital native ICT users, much depends upon teachers themselves. So self-directed professional development. Yesterday we have said that, the learner has to direct his or her learning. Similarly, the teacher has to direct his or her own learning. Thank you so much for all the wonderful questions and your active participation. And thank you so much, Professor Pushpanadham, for being with us and delivering this wonderful session here and enlightening us on very important aspects, various aspects of technology integration. Thank you, all of you. We close the session here.
Thank you.